Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today on Thinking with Anderson. And I'm really excited today to talk to Eli Steele, who is a filmmaker. And I'm going to let him introduce himself because part of what we're going to talk about today is identity and how identity works. And so he's in a position to really help us learn about it. But he, together with his father, Shelby Steele, has been making movies. He made one, What Killed Michael Brown? And we'll talk about that as well because he was canceled by Amazon over this movie. And he's continuing to make good movies. I think he's working right now on a project about white guilt. And so all of that opens up some really interesting topics for us. And the idea right now of conservatives being able to have free speech in situations that are largely controlled by the radical left, whether it's my case in the universities or in filmmaking. Both of those are places where conservatives are in the extreme minority. So, Eli, thank you so much for being willing to talk today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. I think you introduced me quite well. The only thing I would say is that I have a deaf accent. So bear with me. Hopefully the captions will pick it up. But I was born profoundly deaf. So that's why I have this accent.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the characteristics that you bring to your work. And so the identities, I mean, right now we're kind of swimming in the idea of identity politics. And identity politics asks people to divide themselves up into specific identities that can be used by a political movement. And that's something that you and your father have both done great work on resisting. You don't want to, it doesn't mean your identity isn't real. You do a very good job owning your identity, but you don't want it to be used for someone else's game.
Yeah, we have elevated the identity of immutable characteristics, which means the identity of immutable characteristics to the most paramount thing. But that's just something that you're born with. That's something that God gave you for whatever His purpose is or whatever reason. And but that's your external marker. So me being born to a black father, being born to a Jewish mother, being born deaf. I could have easily made any of those into my primary identity in today's America. Well, why? Well, it's an interesting thing for me because I've been very aware of that. And from a young age, I come from Holocaust survivors, and I come from, slavery on the other side.
Yeah.
But I did not suffer. I lived a middle class life in the Bay Area because the people before me, they worked so hard, so hard. My grandfather was born to slave. So I'm not that far away from slavery. And literally, the hand that touched slavery touched me. So that's how close I am. And he was born in 1900. My grandfather, my father was born in 1946. So he was 46 years old. But he worked from where they were slaves in Kentucky to a lower middle class life in Chicago. And then my father took it from there to a very nice middle class life and eventually what I would call an upper middle class life. And so, I didn't suffer any of that. Those themed, and so for me, she played that game. She played that game of milky identity for power. What is that game? That doesn't do anything for me. That doesn't do anything for my own individuality. And so that's why my father and I, followed his steps. We've always put the emphasis on character
Yeah.
because that's what the people before me did. There was no power in my grandfather. There was no power in being black. He didn't even know, you couldn't even call a man back then black. That was the insult. They were Negroes, they were colored, but they were human beings. And then we've gone from that to black. And for him, that was a boring concept to have power because if you're color, when just in the 50s, you would be punished for that very color. And so it's a little bit of a convoluted way of basically saying that just by virtue of my birth, I just never saw the merit of taking power from an identity of immutable characteristics.
Yeah, and I think that that's some of what people talk about when they critique what I'll just call broadly the social justice movement. Because for your in your the work I read from your father when I was in graduate school was about affirmative action, but it was about the time I was in graduate school where the terminology shifted to DEI, and so we've had 40, 50 years of this idea that those kinds of characteristics should be what employers or universities or even teachers take into account rather than merit. But the critique is that, well, merit, though, is conditioned by all these things. And so when people speak about merit, they're really talking about privileges that they were born into. Have you encountered that kind of critique?
But yeah, at in the film, the working on the father, White Guilt, he has a line in there where he stays. I can't quite remember it word for word, but he basically states that it was a way. So let's say if you were going to create a hierarchy of races, the way to put the white man at the bottom is to take merit and call it privilege and call it something more exterior, which means that white privilege means, in other words, you were born with it.
Yeah.
Wherever you did in your life, you never earned that position. You didn't earn your education or whatever. And so it was a way to merit by demonizing merit. It was a way to bring the white man all the way down to the bottom. And then you do the same to the Asian. You start putting the Asian down and call them white adjacent. So it was a way to punish the shit. And so that's just part of in all in for in the name of what? We used to call it good attention, diversity. But I think we're past the point of good attention, where we see that this is a concentrated effort to basically go against everything that America stands for, whether it's the principles of the natural law of the individual, all the inherent rights that we have. It's a way to strip that away and punish for the sins of America's past.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's so the quote from Obama, right, was you didn't earn that, or was that Biden? You didn't earn that?
And that part of it.
Yeah,
And it
talking
causes doubt. It causes doubt in your head, right? Because you think, geez, well, yeah, I've been helped by people. Well, but that's part of the American spirit. We help those who help themselves. That's what I've always noticed. A lot of people come to me and they say, "Oh, I want to make a movie or I want to do something." I say, "Just go ahead. I guarantee you, you may have no contact, no money, but once you start filming, people will come out of nowhere. You'd be shocked,
to
and
help
they
you
will
really.
help you." Yeah, and it always happens.
Wow. Yeah, that I think that we love in America a story about overcoming, right? Most of our movies, popular movies, are about someone who started out with very little and then somehow through hard work they overcame. But isn't that story really what the social justice movement hates? Because it says, well, that's just invented. There's no such stories, or if they are, they're very rare. But what you're saying, and I think what I've experienced is that they're actually not that rare.
Well, the
Hard work
interesting
does
thing,
pay off.
yeah, well, the interesting thing about the social justice movement is America condemn them, demonize people, but we cannot deny the fact that they have taken power in the past. Well,
Yeah.
think about that. Just taking power is something that's already been done, and just taking power in basically past grievances. So then, in the film that we're actually working on right now, we basically use the term the backward man. You're backward. You're looking backwards. You're always looking backwards. That's where your power is. And so you literally walk backward up into a high place in academia, or you walk backward into a high place in the corporate world through DEI or something. But your power is always in the past. So how can those people turn and look forward? They can't, because to do that means to become an individual. It means to walk into a path that's never been created before. We are all, I would never walk your path. You never walk mine. So it's two people that choose the path of an individual.
Yeah.
If you choose that individual path, it really is your own. But when you choose the backward path, you talk alike, you move to the same structure, you have an ideology in place, you have everything ready for you, it's nicely wrapped, and you get a nice paycheck. So, I mean, you're on the very existential level, you're talking about something that's very anti the individual. And that's just, and I don't think they really quite understand what they're doing. I think, well, because you always have the one that, like the leader, they do have the gullible one, yeah, the one that you go along with it, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because one of the talking points would be individualism and self-expression, being your authentic self. But they always end up doing it in a way that's very cookie cutter. So they conform, they say I'm being authentic to myself, but they conform to pre-made patterns of what you should look like within that movement. And so that really isn't very authentic. But what you're getting at is a great idea that there's some kind of existential fear of living the individual life because like you said, you don't know what'll happen. And one of the things I also add to this idea as a philosopher is that it's an easy solution to the problem of evil and suffering, which everybody faces. Even the rich person faces this. The rich aren't immune to depression, and the rich have alcoholism and drug abuse and suicide, which tells us they have the same existential problems as the rest of us. But we all want to figure out, why is my life hard? And this is like a really simple answer. My life's hard because of those guys over there, or this group in the past. But the truth is that even if we had dealt with that somehow, we're still left with ourselves, with that individual person. You still have to make a life for yourself and decide what kind of character to have. So blaming someone else, even if there's a partial truth to it, doesn't really solve your problem.
Yeah, I think my father stays it best. The freedom is the scariest thing in the world. I mean, it's just scary, and that's what America is about. And I think it's even scarier in today's world because, you know, technology, all of this. I mean, we have so many bullshit. You know, AI, we have religion, I mean, it's just, we're living in a time that's just busier than ever.
Yeah.
Temptation or conflict or what, I mean, whatever. I mean, if you go back to the 80s, it wasn't like this at all. As when I was a kid, it was much more simple. I mean, everything was less channels, less content, less
Yeah.
more, you know, are your neighbors and so forth. And now it's just much more. It's like the freedom. As you go back to my father always days, freedom is the scariest thing in the world because it puts all. It doesn't do anything. It's not a promised land. It just puts accountability and responsibility on your shoulder. And they
Yeah.
say, show me what kind of man or woman you are. Show me
That's a great.
who you are stand naked on that stage. And people don't like to do that. So it's why I think that we do have that problem within this world because why is social justice, that movement, rising at a time of the greatest wealth, the greatest privilege, the greatest standard of living? I mean, my children, teenagers, but my God, I think about all the foods they've eaten, all the cultures they've experienced. You know, they've been very fortunate to live in Los Angeles, which is a great city with so much influence. Been in poverty, they've been up in wealthiest houses, they've seen it all, much more than I did. And so why do we have rising social justice? And then in the last couple of years, tribalism that's just gone through the roof, which
Mhm.
anti-Semitism is just another one of that. But all the tribalism, whether it's against the white man, against the Jew, against the Asian, wherever, all those types of tribalism, the scapegoat. And so we use scapegoats to hide our own inferiority. That's the oldest, one of the oldest parts of the human condition.
Mhm.
It's to scapegoat somebody else. And that's
Yeah.
why up to there, and so I think that has a lot to do with the burden of freedom that we're
Yeah, you're
born
right.
into in the country.
Because the other option is I have to take responsibility for myself, and my failures are mine, and that's very uncomfortable. If I could blame another person, I'd much prefer to do that. But so freedom opens the door both to success and to failure, whereas there's some kind of comfort in this identity politics, and you could say, no, I even if I tried my hardest, I never would have succeeded because of these other people. And so you're right.
Absolutely.
You brought in, in your case, both Jewish and Black identity, and they both encounter that kind of scapegoating in different ways.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's been kind of shocking. I mean, I think it was, I think, I grew up with my grandfather. My grandmother, who survived, died from Holocaust-related diseases. My mother was only two, and so my grandfather, raised her, and it was an easy life for my mother. I mean, my mother basically raised herself because he came here with nothing, clearly nothing, no social capital. They speak English, nothing, and did very well. He worked every day. He was a peddler on the street. Did very well. But, when I look at that and I kind of think, you hear all the promises, never again, all of the good faith thing. But he was living in America, coming out of the 70s, like not the depression, but definitely the stagflation, whatever that was, the oil, the Vietnam War, and then you come into the 80s, and all that power of let's just do it, Top Gun, and so that's why the anti-Semitism was much lower because people were looking forward, people were moving forward, they were trying to become somebody, and then we hit this plateau, and then we went over the hill, and then somehow we decided not to keep looking forward as much as we did. I'm not saying that, but there are quite a few powers that be that do that. I think somebody like Candace Owens is a perfect example of that. I think
Yeah.
she was the right wing affirmative action baby. She was brought in for the color of her skin. She really didn't have much merit to herself. I ask people, what's her one original idea? I grew up with my father. I know how hard it was for him to sit in a tiny little room that he would pay rent, like $300 a month to rent, in this tiny little room and come up with this idea from scratch. Thomas Sowell, all of that. And she didn't do that. And so when the black conservative grip kind of started to wear off, all of a sudden she didn't know what to do. And so then it goes to conspiracy land.
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
if you're not a person of merit, and so that it's not about left or right. It's really a human condition. If you have your own brain powers to stand on alone and create something, then you have to go to a conspiracy identity in the worst way.
Yeah, that's almost the equivalent on the conservative side to the left's social justice, and it does get into some very dark anti-Semitic places, which we've also though seen at our universities, which is for me it's just kind of perplexing. I'm trying to make sense of this. Why are we seeing universities? I think Harvard is still in court with the Trump administration over settling on not protecting their Jewish students. How do you interpret that? As someone who's Jewish, what is that? All of a sudden, universities are having anti-Semitic marches. I've never seen that in my lifetime.
Yeah, I think if I was a student today I wouldn't have a problem. I'd be on the news probably for calling people out. I mean, it's just my nature. I guess I'm more like my father. My father, I think people they always see him on TV as a very he's very calm, but very firm in what he believes because he's truly a person of merit. He has lived that life. He has earned his views. And I came along the same way, and it's interesting because though I never suffered what he did, growing up in segregation, well, even my mother with the anti-Semitism, being a daughter of an immigrant, being on her own in New York City, having to find her own. I mean, she's on her own pretty much from 13 and on for sure. All of that, but I was born deaf, so that gave me my own struggle, and that gave him my own understanding of what identity mean to be bullied for being different. But I was like, well, why are you doing that? And they, oh, blah, 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 you talk funny, blah, 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 you're deaf. You deaf retarded. I mean, I got called every name in the book. I got beaten up by kids. It was just part of my life. So it's
Yeah.
showing me how people would just reduce you to one identity. And they would just come after you for that. But then also show me the good people. So kind of go back to your point is that in America, so my point is that if I'm getting to university, I would have been able to handle that, I think, in my own way. But
Yeah.
I think the university have banked so much on identity of immutable characters.
Yeah.
They have banked so much on diversity and gave virtue from diversity that they almost talk about that before they talk about the academic. It's an old joke. You go on university website or brochure and there's diversity. It's just one standard. In high school around here, they have like section of the plan for the school. Section one will often be diversity.
Yeah. No, it is.
You're
Yeah.
doing, yeah, and so I think universities are the same way. So when you do that, you can promote people based on that, and then you create a vacuum of talent. And so when you get caught, like Harvard with Claudine Gay, when you
Hmm.
get caught becoming the college president without much qualification, and you're being caught for plagiarism, that's pretty shameful. And so you double down on that. But you admit that you've done that for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
That's not
Well,
easy because
yeah. No.
you're taking away their identity. You're telling them what you did was wrong. And then if you're hollow on the inside, you get fight like the devil.
Yeah. Well, that goes to the point. Maybe the bigger point here is about character and the struggle it takes to develop character in order to overcome suffering instead of the easy allure of your suffering is due to somebody else. But the truth is that you've pointed out that we live in a very easy time. So I don't have a lot to talk about in one way when I look at world history and the amount of suffering that's gone on. But when I think about my life and the things that have been worth earning, it's always been through working really hard and struggling. And maybe I'm going to fail. I don't know. I don't have any promise I'll succeed. And when we think about great literature or great movies, we love to see heroes that work hard and overcome. I don't think there's like a great movie about a guy who just sits on a couch and you watch him sit on a couch for 2 hours. He's watching Netflix. And so it's interesting how the social justice story, although in one way it attracts people, in another way it doesn't really speak to our deepest needs. It doesn't really provide meaning in life.
No. Yeah, I started in the deaf community. In 1988, we had what was called how old was I? I was about 13 in 1988, and we had the Gallaudet. Gallaudet University is the only deaf university in America. There's other colleges that have a deaf department, but Gallaudet is completely deaf. And they wanted the deaf president. I get it. I can kind of understand that. I mean, there's a great documentary on it right now, but I had a problem with it because it became all about just get a deaf president by any means. But this education there, major problem for the education, major problem for the line of the mayor. Should they dead? So they never fix any of the problems, but they
Yeah.
got a deaf president. So it's sort of a hollow fishery in a way. And so that's why I think that it's a great film. It kind of goes to your point. The documentary is definitely really good. But when you consider the wider picture, when you consider how totalitarian the deaf identity became, after that uprising, they became a value system as opposed upon the deaf identity.
Hmm.
To the point that somebody like me, born profoundly deaf, which means basically the worst level other than stone deaf. I'm on the bottom, literally, was not deaf because I spoke, because I live in the hearing world and so forth. So I'm not really deaf. However, the guy over here who is born to multiple generations of deafness could even be hard of hearing, not completely deaf. But that person who's dying through that the deaf culture is more deaf than I am.
Yeah.
But like you see your point, what's the inspiration in that? I
Yeah.
think my story, and my funny breath, but I think my story is probably a little bit more inspirational. I think that my parents having that faith in me as a baby, wanting to teach me how to talk. I went into the program when I was about a year old. I didn't say my first word until I was about almost 4 years old.
Oh, wow.
So you're talking about 3 years. My parents were called abusive. They were told to, put me in sign language and all of that. but they had a faith. And then one day I spoke my first word. And my mother was cutting a tomato, and she would always toss me. That's what she would always do. So for 3 years, she was just tossing me. My dad too. And she cut her finger on a tomato, and she said, "Ow!" And so that was my first word. But once I made that connection between the vibrations in your throat, because just remember, I had no idea the sound was supposed to come out. But once I made that connection, I was able to make rapid progress. I probably was not on grade level until
Sure.
like 12th grade. I mean, it did
Really?
take a long time. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was a good student, but in terms of being independent, it did take about 12 years to building up your skill set. I think that's a more inspirational story, in my
Yeah.
opinion. I'm not
Yeah. You
putting
know,
them down. Yeah, I'm not trying to put down the other. I know a lot of there are people that do know ASL. They have lived, and they are immensely successful, but they all pursue their own path.
yeah.
So
That's what
yeah, so it doesn't matter with the language, but they're other ones that sit there and play the identity game. I'm deaf. I come from multiple generations, so therefore I'm awesome. Okay, wow, wow. His name is Black Power. His name is wow. Okay, you're really black. Cool. Or a white supremacist. Wow, you fly that flag or whatever it is. Cool. It's
yeah.
hollow. It's hollow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great word. Hollow men. T.S. Eliot wrote about that, and this picture of men without chests was what C.S. Lewis said, and they don't have any character. So they're told what to think and they're told what to do, but there's no heart there to show that they have wisdom or courage or honesty. And so it's interesting in my perspective because it seems like over the last 8 to 10 years, studies on what's called disability studies have really taken off within social justice departments. So they started one up in my school as well to study disability studies. And it's an interesting thing to watch from the outside because there is a tension you're mentioning, which is even the word disability it could be wrong because it seems to imply that this should be cured. And a person who's made that their identity would say, no, I'm not something to cure. And you need to accept me as I am. But then that raises a lot of questions about, well, then we wouldn't, if we do that, we don't want to make accommodations then, because that would imply that you're somehow different than others. And so it can be hard to navigate some of this philosophy about ableism.
Yeah, ableism. Yeah, no matter where I get in trouble. At the with disability, she's my way of life. mm, If you ask me, what I'm fighting for, what my father's fighting for, what we do the work for, is for the individual. Okay, you're free to do whatever you want in the country. You want to sit on a couch, and the government will pay for it. All right, well that's your choice. Other people are free to fight for the right to take away that right. So good luck to you that you should keep that money coming in. I mean, because it could change.
Yeah.
So I take that approach with disability. So that's why the people say, well, like for example, when the baby is born, there was a fight over, and then let's say a baby was born, they have the newborn Erie Queenie, which is great because my mother didn't find out until a year later after,
Wow.
yeah, after a year. And so, but the argument is, okay, what options should we give the parent? My view is give them every option, ASL, oralism, which is me, or total, which is to have a combination of ASL and oralism. The cochlear implant, hearing aid, give them all the options. Some on the deaf culture, I get them more militant, would be like, no, 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 it has to be ASL. You cannot fix them. ASL is their native language, is their okay, but then somebody like me, it's not my native language. So who you should argue against my way of life? So that's why I feel like give all the choices, let people make their own decision, whatever you want. My parents wanted me to have all the options. So they wanted me to learn how to speak. And it wasn't easy. I would say about half of the kids in that preschool program, about half of them did not make it. Because a lot of times when you're born deaf, you're also born with another disability or another learning disability. Thankfully for me, it was just deafness. And but at the same time, I had the worst hearing loss of anybody in that group.
Yeah.
So that's why I just think it's so individualistic, and I know so many successful deaf people. They have built career. I mean, I know this girl who is she went to work for Accenture, that big accounting firm.
Oh,
And
okay.
she was like 22. She went to Dartmouth, 22, and she's now the top. She got a mansion in Dudley City. I mean, so yeah, so but that's why I don't like it when these social justice people come in and they say disability is a bad word, or you have to use the word ableism. Well, for me, disability is a great word because it says, hey, yes, you were born without one of your five senses, but you overcome it.
Yeah.
It just means something that you have to overcome because if you want to be part of the world, you can have to overcome.
Hmm.
That's just the reality. And I would not trade my life or my parents' issue for anything.
Yeah. Well, that's the key. I mean, running through your dad's work and your work is the ability to overcome, that we have power within ourselves. We don't want to give up our power to some external group, but instead we have to all face different things. And it's true, some people they win the birth lottery and they seem like they have a very easy life. But whenever I've talked to people who from the outside they look like they have an easy life, you'll find out that they're deeply depressed or going through problems you had no idea they're going through. We all face something like that, but our ability to overcome is really inspiring. And I think part of what is interesting in your case is that you learn this from your dad. I'm not saying not your mom, but your dad had a particular role in teaching this. And you've said a couple times what me and my dad are fighting, or me and my father are fighting. And you have this kind of shared mission. And it just reiterates to me the importance of fathers. You mentioned both your paternal and your maternal grandfathers.
Yeah, my father, I mean, if you think about it, he's never lived in America that was completely free
Mm,
because, you came out of segregation and he was like, okay, I'm a free man. But then all this race policy, so whether it's disabilities, race, gender, wherever it is, these identities are in a way pushing because they come with because they come with the ideology. A lot of times the oppressor versus the oppressed. So then, and whenever you take on an identity that grounded in one of those characteristics, you need the other to defend your stuff, to define your stuff again. And that other, unfortunately, has been the white man because of the past in America. And so and so we do that. That's why if I say I'm deaf, what I mean by that is I'm saying I have the condition that's just part of who I am. But I never say that's who I am. It's
yeah,
part of who I am, but I never say it's who I am. Same
yeah,
thing with being black. I mean, I should come from this line. I come from this line. And oh, wow, well, how you make sense of all of that? Well, that's why I think for me, the American identity is the most true and powerful identity because it allows you to be whatever religion you want to be. It allows you to take whatever job you want to take. It allows you to make all the individual choices.
yeah.
And
I
I
love
mean,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
No, I love this idea that American is an identity because a lot of times what you'll find when you talk to people, young people, my students, or even in high school, is they'll say, "Well, I live in America, but I'm," and then they'll fill it in. Maybe their family came from Ireland or where, 3 generations ago, and they've lived here for 100 years, but they'll still identify that way because they think America isn't an identity. But you're 100% right. It's a specific kind of identity.
they were taught that.
Yeah.
That came in the 60s, the 70s. Because the civil rights movement, the whole point of the civil rights movement was to abolish the black boss and the white boss. Because the black boss meant inferiority, the white boss meant superiority. And then we said, oh, well, America is still a racial country in this, in the late 60s and the 70s. So we reinvented the boss. And so we now have five
Yeah.
primary race bosses. And I made a movie on this, how Jack became black. And that
Yeah.
was the documentary that made people what killed Michael Brown. But the whole point was, well, my child, his mother is the firstborn in America. Her family is from Mexico, and my kids are even more mixed than me. So which box do I check in them? That's why how Jack became black because I had to check one box in order
Yeah.
to enroll my kid in school. So what taught this? My son is being taught immediately that he has to pick a racial identity, something that is stub America. There's no such thing as stub America. You're either American or you're not. And so when you pick a race, you're going against American values.
Yeah, that's the key, right? Is it's not that it's America's some other race. It's that no, we believe in the individual's right and responsibility to pursue our own goals and to build our character. So yeah, I think that's a really great point. I'd love to see that kind of take off as we see conservatives becoming more and more outspoken after Charlie Kirk's assassination. I hope that might be one thing we reclaim is a love of what it means to be American altogether. And I think that's one story I shared with you, which will get me to my next question, is that you had posted something probably the week or just after Charlie Kirk was murdered, and it was about being over BLM, being over white guilt, and I reposted it on X, and I got turned in by somebody at my work at ASU. So I got an email from ASU's provost, second in charge of the largest state university in the country, and she took time out of her day to let me know I have problematic posts on X. But the post, of course, was not mine. It was yours. I agreed with it, but it was your post. And I was turned in. I'd said to her, I don't think the person who turned me in knows who this is I'm reposting or the work that he does. But it also told me something, which is I'm being watched. And I don't know who turned me in, but that makes it even more mysterious. Anybody watching could decide one of Professor Anderson's posts doesn't live up to my standards, so I'm going to turn him in. And that creates this chilling effect where usually it's conservatives don't feel like they can speak up at the university because they'll be turned in. They're getting extra scrutiny. And so I wanted to use that story because it is part of how we connected and lead into you must have faced the chilling effect in your education as well, especially when people realize that you weren't going to just use the same liberal talking points, that you were going to think for yourself.
Yeah, that's why I made the post in the first place, because everything that lists on that list, which were we are over BLM, we're over white privilege, we're over respectability policies, we're over all of that. Every single one thing that list, except for I think it was anti-Semitism, but everything I list, it a defense mechanism of the left. Every one of those is a construct created by the left to protect the left mission, which is basically liberation ideology or theology, whatever you want to call it, that divides us is the oppressed. So if you were to question that and you're a white male, they'd be like, hey, you can't go there. You're white privilege. You stay in your lane, or you can appropriate, somebody else's race, whatever it is. The other one is, if you were to say, black people, you need to take responsibility. Oh, no, you can't say that. That's respectability policy. That's, stay in your lane. So, but what you see right here is white guilt in action. So when the proposed comes to you, he basically saying, you as a white man, you can't post this stuff. This challenges our order. This challenges the diversity order at the college. And so what she's hoping is the chilly effect is they just say, oh, I don't want to be a racist. Because white guilt is not asked, and my father says it's not asked to a guilt. It's the fear of being stigmatized as a racist. So it's a tremendous power that they use. And so she's hoping that you will be quiet over this post. And she's not interested in discussion. She's not interested in asking you why you did it. She's basically saying, hey, this is objectionable. This doesn't fall within our university guideline. Well, but isn't the university the place for free thought?
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I asked for. I said, I don't find this to be a problematic post, but I'd love to hear other perspectives on that if anyone wants to debate it. I didn't get any follow up on that offer. But I was sharing with you also about how I became aware of your father's work in graduate school because he would usually be included as the one conservative. Might have 10 readings and 9 of them will be on the left, and they'll say, well, we got to read one conservative guy. And so they'll have an article maybe about affirmative action or something by your dad. And you were telling me something about when you went to school, NYU.
Yeah, I went to NYU for 1 year. before I transferred to Claremont Mechanic College. Um, yeah, I was surprised by that. We had, like, I think it was called the Norton Anthology. So I think it
Yeah.
was like, yeah, that's what we call freshman English. I think it was. I remember opening, yeah. Well, I think I started understood it, but now it's like, oh man, now we have to because I would get so much slack for having him as
Really?
a father. Yeah, and it was something that I think it's only been maybe the last 3 or 4 years that the culture has shifted, that he's become more acceptable. But for most of my life, it was people would find out who he was, and then it's like, okay, is the temperature in the room going to go up, or
Hmm.
is he going to be cool or not? And because he was such a not his fault, but just because of the culture, he was such an inflammatory figure. He was such a divisive figure. I making this Mike Gill documentary I found in the old TV clip, and if you're back in the you should watch him. And he really was tough guy going after Cornell West. Now
Really?
I see why none of those guys would ever debate him again.
Yeah, huh.
Because he got them already. I mean, he just shut them down and very respectfully so. But that's why the left really should shut him out. The New
Right,
York
yeah.
Times, all of that, they should blacklist him, shut him out. Shelby in that class, yeah, the students went after him. They kind of
That's
ripped
so
him
oh,
apart. Yeah, they
it's
ripped him
so interesting to
apart.
think about that.
I was just like, okay. I didn't really argue because in that kind of situation, you're not going to win.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah,
in
but
numbers.
they was just look at me and then look away and make the argument. And
Well, that's
but I
so
never,
interesting that he's shut down by those liberal outlets who would otherwise champion him based on immutable characteristics, but because he is saying things that are way out there. I mean, the description you just gave, if someone heard you describing what your dad's teaching and you didn't tell them what it is, they would think, "Oh, I guess he's like promoting a active revolution over the government or something." No, he's saying build character. And that was so startling to the left that they blacklisted him and wouldn't talk to him.
yeah, and that's why he does something when he interviews like. There's nothing controversial about what I'm saying. Sure, I think, and what I'm saying is common sense. If he's so controversial, well, that's not a reflection on him. That's a
Yeah.
reflection on all these Americans. They have betrayed the American principle. And that's what makes him controversial, because he holds the mirror up to them and states, you are using race as your mean to power.
Yeah.
You are playing a race game. You are exploiting Black people.
Yeah.
You're using them, and you're not doing anything to uplift them. You don't treat them like human beings. You
Yep.
just use them because, and that's what white guilt is the most powerful force. After here, I think it's one of the most underrated forces because it's a very understandable force. And that's why my father teaches human perspective on it. But you can't have 4 centuries of oppression, slavery, and its degradation without some fallout. And the
Yeah.
whites lost their moral authority. I mean, they had claimed the supremacy based on the race. I don't know if that's really a moral authority, but for them, it was their moral authority. But they lost that. And then, but what they did was they did not use the American principle to uplift those that they had oppressed. They lost, but maybe they were never truly American.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't, because I think my father is more American than them. And so they turn around, and the first thing they're concerned about is not the Black people, but their own moral authority.
Yeah.
So they make themselves into white saviors. And we've been living this for the last 60 years until that's become their identity.
Isn't it interesting how that's the left now does that?
And that's it. And now we're moving into the international scope. Where you see in the UK, you can't fly the British flag.
Yeah.
You can, and but this guy coming from another country who's been here for 5 minutes has more power than you. That's
Because yeah,
white guilt. That's Western guilt. I mean, Hamas knew, and we have Hamas in the film, and it'd be probably controversial, but Hamas knew we were ready for them. They knew that the world had been conditioned by white guilt. And so that's why October 7th, the same day, protests, cheer. And so that's why I think a lot of people, even on the right, missed it completely.
Yeah.
They missed the fight. They didn't see it. And so that's where the film, I think, White Girl, that's
Mhm.
why I'm excited about it coming out, because I think
Well,
it really, hopefully, will pull people back to the continuation of the fight. That our number one enemy really is this liberation ideology.
yeah.
It's the anti-American force, the anti-Russian force.
That's great. Yeah, when is it coming out? What's the release date?
I'm hoping she finish it by the end of the year for sure.
So it
So
sounds like it'll be
maybe
really
April.
yeah, it'll be really timely because this is the main method that anyone is silenced, especially at universities. This fear of being called a name like racist. And your dad has a really good quote about the original sin of the United States, because Obama said the original sin was slavery. But tell everyone what your dad says about it.
Yeah, the original sin is not slavery in America because we didn't invent slavery. But the original sin is our use of race as the means to power. Liberation ideology was not invented in America. It was invented, I believe, in Colombia. It came out with the Catholic Church liberation theology. But we turned it into a power in the country. And we have refined it in academia. And so now it come out. And so that's why other countries hate us, because we exported this very simple, Estelian ideology that has some truth to it. Yeah, there were colonialism. Yes, there was slavery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that it's interesting to focus on you mentioned immutable characteristics, the way that the LGBTQ movement positions itself to be part of the group that's oppressed. But in order to do that, they have to make their sexual desires something immutable that they're born with. But then when the T is added on, trans, now it is not something immutable anymore. It's something that could be changed by surgery or drugs of some kind. But they want to kind of get on the bandwagon of suffering. And I wonder if white guilt plays a part there, because if you're a white kid, especially a male, you're the bad guy. There's only one shot you have at being a good guy, and that's if you've been oppressed because of your sexuality. Otherwise, you have to always be with the bad guys.
Yeah, as somebody who believes in the individual, I always hate making
Yeah.
generalizations, I guess.
Yep. Yeah.
But I think there's in some cases, I would say there's absolutely no doubt that be used. I mean, without exception. But well, it's a tricky situation because I think there's great with whites in general. I think there's been a great shame. If you look in the whites in the 70s and the 80s, and I'll never forget this, being in New York City and seeing this white man get on the subway. Basically, he made himself into a Native American, covered in turquoise jewelry. So, in other words, he was not a white man. He was overcompensated to say that he was something other than white.
Hmm.
And I think that we take that philosophy and we take that into K through 12 schools or in university, and we teach kids over and over that whiteness is bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we teach them that the only way within this liberation ideology, the oppressor, the only way to escape being oppressor is to become an ally to the oppressed. Well, then there are going to be people within that take it to the extreme. That's sort of how I would look at it, because there'll be people who are fine being allies, and there's some people who take it to the extreme and use it to craft another identity. I think you can tell those people apart pretty good, because I think there's a lot of people, whether they're LGBTQ or whatever it is. Well, I don't know if I would put the Q part in there because that's queer. That's usually a political identity. But
Right. Yeah.
if you should, right? But if you share, I mean, I grew up with lesbians living across the street.
Mhm.
They were never political. They just lived their life. They were never so. I have to kind of go on that. Like, we respect what they did. They
Yeah.
were full functioning people of there was T-shirts. Yeah, and so that's why I think
Well,
it's
that's what it sounds like, the LG and B part. You'll see people who they generally can be sometimes conservative, and they'll say,
yes,
we're getting co-opted by the trans movement, but we're our own thing, and we don't wanna be lumped in with that anymore."
absolutely. So I think that this white guilt thing, it plays on the really weak-minded. If you really don't have a sense of self, because if you really had a dream in life, if you had a purpose-driven life, if you have a faith, I really believe that. I mean, I was talking about my faith a lot in public, but if you have a faith in something higher than yourself, I mean, even having faith in America, let's say you're an atheist, but having a
Yeah.
faith in America, well, that's higher than yourself because you believe in the natural law, you believe in the American principle, you believe in the idea of the individual. And that's something that should pull you in that direction. If you don't have any faith in that, then all you have is yourself. You make yourself into what? A demigod? I
Yep.
mean, you make it like I did a whole documentary on the guy from Uvalde, the shooter. When you look at his house, there's a cross on every window. I mean, every room, even the bathroom, the hallway. It's a very typical Latino house. So how you escape the God? How you make yourself into a man God? And you're gonna kill those kids. You're gonna take their life. Well, you don't have faith in anything other than yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's a miserable way to live because then how you really love, how you get the human connection, how you get out of your stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. I'm glad, the religious side came up. You don't have to talk about any sides of your faith you don't want to, but I'm a Christian. And so I often think, though, when we get into white guilt issues, the fact of guilt is something every human faces. And that's one of the important parts of Christianity is how to deal with our guilt, not just between each other, but before God. And so when you get into a purely secular situation, there's no longer any way to deal with guilt with God because God doesn't exist. But I think we still feel it because that doesn't mean we're not made in God's image. When you say you're an atheist, you still have this feeling, I'm disconnected from my creator. But it also doesn't have any really healthy solutions for how to deal with each other and forgiveness. And so the most we still have is kind of retribution that your people hurt my people, and so I need to get paid back for what you did. And that's just a perpetual war series. Whereas Christianity comes in and it's
Tribalism.
yeah, you've got to forgive your neighbor because you've been forgiven. And unfortunately, in a lot of the decolonizing movement, it'll pick out things which are absolutely true problems that are in colonization, but it lumps in everything Christian with everything that was profit oriented. And it loses any ability or nuance to distinguish a missionary from someone looking for tea or gold.
Yeah. Um, I mean, Christianity, as a lot of religions, the good ones have always kind of gone through a reformation. They've had to, move away from certain things and get you to a certain place. And so that's why we are the beneficiaries of that. I mean, we live in, America, its founding was no doubtly Christian and heavily Judeo-Christian, heavily in those values.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's quite amazing. So I think a lot. If you don't know, like the Enlightenment, if you don't know the age of reason, if you don't understand those things, that you don't know where you come from. But I always tell people, well, the Jews were in the ghetto until the age of Enlightenment because they feared the Jew. Well, why did they fear the Jew? And so they had a little bit of a balance where, okay, no, we're gonna have a national identity. And so all of a sudden, okay, you become German. You become
Yeah.
that's why or you become French. That's why the Dreyfus affair in France was so powerful because the guy was still French, but they were gonna
Yeah.
make him a Jew. Well, why did they need to make him a Jew? And that's a decline. And because where you lose a healthy religion, when you lose that healthy balance between religion and state, I mean, it's a separation, we have separation of church and state, but there always has to be a balance between the two because our state come out of those universal, like if we call them universal Christian values. I mean, we come up with a justice system where the poor and the rich are going to get equal treatment that comes from the Bible. All of that. So, I mean, And so our culture, I think, rather we are just so privileged, we are so spoiled as a
Well,
nation that
that's
we
the
just
key
say,
word. What you just said, we're so privileged. Why? It's not because of wealth per se, it's because of the truths you just mentioned. The truths about law, individual respect for individual rights, which we derive from the Bible. So when we talk about privilege, I'm okay with that in one sense of saying, the greatest privilege of my life is that I was born to parents who taught me to read the Bible and taught me to think through issues like who is Jesus and what is my sin and how should I live and how should I love others. That's the privilege. And we were middle class, lower middle class. So no one can say, well, you had all this wealth. No, but I had something better. I had a mom who, when I was 3 years old, taught me these things. And I wouldn't trade that for a billionaire mom.
absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And so you grew up with the value. And so I think that's with Missy. So I think some people are, I know, it's hard for me to say because I know people, same family. One kid goes this way.
Yeah.
It goes to the social justice movement. The other kids joined the police force. So a completely different path. Same parent. So
How did you end up following your dad? How did you end up being on the same mission as him? Because a lot of times, kids, especially if a father's kind of famous, they define themselves against their parent.
I think it was, I mean, I went on my own path for a long time. And about 20 years, yeah. And then I had MTV pilot, and then that was when the writer's strike happened in 2008, and that's also when the stock market crashed. So it was a double whammy, everything, and I had a baby, and so I was like, I gotta get a real job now. I gotta, give up this. So I went to Pepperdine School of Public Policy, got an MPP. But while I was there, I was playing around with with this dash, the software, the program, and I would put in things like race and so forth and multiracial. And I saw some interesting things. I saw how they really had race had really no theory on a lot of this stuff. I mean, having these two parents in the house, having one parent, that would change the numbers drastically between, crime or whatever it was. So then my son, and I had my kid, and my daughter was born, and I said, well, what's America going to be like for them? Because
Mm.
it's so mixed. I mean, and I remember this was like in 2010, and we were starting to go into what I call the great racialization of America. Obama was the president, race was starting to come back. And so I was
Yeah,
like,
he really
oh, the
did bring it back
temperature,
rather than solve it.
exactly. And so that's why I said, well, I've got the itch to scratch. I got a job. Thankfully, I got rejected from every think tank. I got rejected from every think tank, which is great because the job I got was basically a policy research job for this nonprofit in New York, and I'm in LA. And so it's a work from home job. It was awesome. Rich man, I could travel. I could work anywhere in the world. And so I made How Jack Became Black, which was basically the premise was I go to enroll my kid in the school, in the public school, and you have to check a primary race. And I realized, oh, you my kid can I would say leave it blank. No, you cannot leave it blank. Your kid cannot come into the school unless you check one primary race. So then, so it took 5 years to make that film, and then after I was done with that, I remember just going to my dad, and I was just like, "Hey, we gotta do a documentary on Ferguson.
Yeah.
We gotta take your idea, and we gotta put them, in Ferguson because the poetic truth of the white guilt, we gotta do that." And then that led to this film, White Guilt, which was, okay, the world changed. The white guilt is now international. You have to remember when my dad saw white guilt, it was very small on the individual level. Then
Yeah,
it went
yeah,
to the college shit. Then it went to the corporate world, and then now
yeah.
it's gone.
Well, and what's interesting is I'm not sure my youngest students, maybe an 18-year-old in college even remembers Ferguson right now. So tell us about that movie. I mean, for people listening, if they're on the younger side, they maybe kind of barely remember it, but it really kind of got eclipsed by BLM and George Floyd.
The significance of the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson was that it was the beginning of Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter had kind of started to form 2 years prior, after the death of Trayvon Martin.
Mm.
And these Black Lives Matter activists, who had largely come out of academia, were trained Marxists into the liberation ideology, were now looking for the next victim in a way that they could, as my father might say, become the ticket to ride, something they could exploit. So Michael Brown was walking down the middle of a street in Ferguson, Missouri, a small suburb, which is about 5 miles north of St. Louis, North St. Louis. If you don't know the city, North St. Louis is pretty much all black, and South St. Louis is more white. And so for Ferguson, a town that's about 35% white, 65% black, surrounded by mostly black suburbs around it. Like Jenny, 99% black. Dalewood, 99% black. So Ferguson, another interesting thing about Ferguson was that it was one of the first cities in America to intentionally integrate.
Wow.
That's the irony about what happened. They were actually trying to break down segregation and create this diverse community, and in many ways they succeeded. So a lot of blacks would move out of St. Louis and buy their first home in Ferguson. And so Michael Brown was had robbed a liquor store, was walking down the middle of the road with another guy. They encountered the Officer Darren Wilson, a white guy. Michael Brown, black. And, words just, no, it's not clear. Profanity depends on who you talk to. But the outcome is that Michael Brown reaches into the car for the gun. Into the gun. Michael Brown is high on marijuana. Reaches into the car. 2 shots are fired. So they were struggling for the gun. They fired 2 shots. He goes off. Michael Brown is shot in the thumb. So he got blood coming out. They go down about 100 yards. There's a building, so they cross this building over. And then the officer, of course, followed, telling him, hey, stop, stop. And Michael Brown stopped in the driveway, turns around. The guy that he was with, Dorian Johnson, is the guy that does the whole hands up those shoe narrative, had run behind the car. So he didn't really see what happened. But Michael Brown turns around. There's all these witnesses, and he charged the officer. Officer shoots him dead. But what happened was there's no video, nothing.
Yeah.
So what we did with this film was we said, hey, Ferguson is fascinating because it marks the first time in America that we really divorce over the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, half of the country said, let's wait for the evidence. The other half said, no. It is black kid, black victim, white cop. It's racism. Done. He was executed in broad daylight. Hands up, don't shoot. They were already marshy. And
Yeah.
I remember being my father and everything. Oh my God, they already took it off. And I realized maybe they're right. Maybe they saw it. Maybe, Then 2 weeks later, the autopsy report come out. And they show that Michael Brown, because they have said that Michael Brown was executed on his knee, that he had been shot in the back.
Yeah.
But the autopsy reports show that he was shot in the front. He was charged with the officer. The one thing that I did in the documentary that I'm kind of proud of is that we got the witness testimony,
Wow.
and we got the FBI, the St. Louis County Police, and the Ferguson Police had to sort of identify this group of about 6 or 8 witnesses, all of them black. Every one of them ignored by the media. There's not one interview of any of these witnesses. Nothing. No media, even off the record, no media ever. They only use the guy that pumped the false narrative, Dorian Johnson, who, by the way, was apparently murdered just about 2 months ago. So
Really?
yeah, so he was martyred. So we created the shooting by using these voices of black people who have been dismissed because they didn't fit the narrative. And so I think we're proud of this film because almost everybody that we interviewed was a Democrat.
Wow.
I mean, we interviewed the president of
They don't fit the narrative.
NAACP, and I would tell people, I always tell people, watch the other films on Ferguson. Watch them. The Rush Hour. I don't have a problem. Watch all of them. I would love to have a film festival. Show the other 8 films on Ferguson. I mean, I would think anybody was step through all of them, and then show mine, and then we'll have a nice debate because I think it'd be a great way of showing what's going on in America. Why are we so divided? And yeah, so it was and another thing, if you at the NAACP president, if you watch our interview with him, then Google his interview with Vice News, VICE Vice News. Wholly different interview. It's a great way to show it matters who asks the question.
Interesting, yeah. So that's, I mean, that from that perspective, the movie is also a fascinating story about making movies, making documentaries, getting eyewitnesses and what eyewitnesses say to different people. Because you're right, the narrative that the mainstream media ran with was the hands up, don't shoot narrative right away. And nothing was going to disprove that. No matter what came out, that was going to be the narrative. So then fast forward to George Floyd, and it's a very similar issue in terms of the media establishing a narrative. Although the situations are different and the details of how the two people died are different, the similarity is this was the narrative they were going to go with.
Absolutely, absolutely, because that's where the power is. You usually race as a mean to power, and so that's where the original sin of America is. And what a tremendous power. I mean, they shut down. I live in Los Angeles. They shut down everything in LA. They boarded up everything in LA for something that happened in Minneapolis, 2,000 miles away. They changed my kids' curriculum in school. They took Huckleberry Finn and threw it out the window. And Huckleberry Finn, ironically, is probably the best anti-racist book ever written.
That's the thing is this it humanizes the characters so much. Yep.
Yeah, and so, I mean, you take Huckleberry Finn because Huckleberry Finn, but the difference was Huckleberry Finn lived under true oppression, with Jim. And he said, oh my God, to get real justice, to uphold my faith in man, in God, I actually have to break the rules of my society. My society is corrupt. I actually have to break those rules to do the right thing and
Yeah.
rescue Jim.
Yeah.
And he does.
Yeah.
And so that's the irony of an anti-racism claim. But the anti-racism of today, where is the oppression?
Yeah. Well, and that my school actually started about the same time as George Floyd, an anti-racism committee in order to monitor the campus dialogue and also to bring in approved speakers who would explain to us how to be more anti-racist. And so this seems like something just really tyrannical. This is the view we're all going to hold, and we're going to look at this school, and any speech that doesn't conform to this, we're going to get rid of because we'll use white guilt. We'll call it
Yeah.
racist. And that's terrifying. Professors, that's like the scariest thing that can happen to a white professor is to be called racist.
Let me ask you a question. Which version of Michael Brown do they teach at ASU?
Well, you know the answer to that, right?
Well, then you're lying to the kid.
Yeah, they teach the mainstream media one, but that's why I said it almost seems like that got eclipsed by George Floyd. I hear much more about George Floyd.
Yeah, but Michael Brown, I think, when you go back, that's the open. That's the key. And basically going on, I remember my dad did one 7 days in Benton Hills. So if you follow the career of Al Sharpton, if you follow the career of Jesse Jackson,
Yeah.
they're all rich. And how have they made America better? They
Yeah,
haven't.
that's the thing there. BLM's really seems to be a similar boat, right? They've been
Oh, yeah,
quiet.
yeah, yeah. It was a white guilt movement
Yeah,
because
but in
it was
terms of
white
making
guilt
money,
money.
they've made a
Money.
lot of money. Do any of
absolutely.
the do any of the younger African American thinkers like Ibram X. Kendi, and he wrote Anti-Racism. Do they ever interact with your father or his work at all?
Yeah, did they ever, because I mean, no, because how did they ever dare to? Did they, because I mean, it's just they think he is ideological. So
Yeah,
if you think he's ideological, then you have to kind of stay within this bar.
yeah,
If you think ideologically like my father, then you should pull everything. You should pull from. It's like if you're anti-Semite, you think he becomes small. And so that's where you become because we become bound to some identity or define this stuff against somebody else. You think he's much smaller. So that for them to encounter somebody that's free thinking, to encounter somebody that has depth to it, yeah, and that's why they have to restore to the list that I posted about we are over there. They have to restore to one of those dimensions.
yeah,
My father has no dimension.
yeah,
He's not going to come down and and reduce you to your skin color
yeah.
to win an argument against you. He's not going to call you Uncle Tom. Um,
Well, that's the problem, right? Is we're not, as a philosopher, one of the things I worry about is that we're not teaching our students how to have actual arguments. An argument usually in their mind means where you're yelling at each other, but you're not able to present the other person's viewpoint. You can say, I disagree with you, but you can present it well. Here's what you think. And the other person says, yeah, you're right. You got me right. And then you can say, and here's why I think you're wrong, though. We're not doing that. We're just teaching students to assign blame based on white guilt or other categories. And I think that might be one of the reasons that people at the universities really hated Charlie Kirk, because what he
well,
did
I
was
was just thinking about that 100%. I mean, people think of I don't know if it's a balloon flying. People think of Charlie Kirk at the end of the program or something. They base stain on the conservative. They base stain he's a racist, all of that stuff. I mean, all of that's relevant. But at the true beauty of Charlie Kirk, I think, was his humanness. I did get into some arguments with him. I mean, we got this stupid argument over the ASL interpreter. And I'm like, no, I'm going to argue that point, even though I'm not on that side. I mean, say, no, that was written down. I mean, Charlie didn't know everything, of course, but he knew so much. But he had a way of arguing his point that made him a worthy person to listen to.
yeah,
And what he did is something that people should aspire to. Wherever your background is, you should aspire to that level of understanding and even empathy done right, not false empathy. You should
yeah,
mean empathy of listening to people that are different than you. I
right,
mean, there was one that he listened to with some trans, I think it was a woman, and didn't quite understand what had happened to her. And it's a painful video because she was a child, and you listen, and he had that compassion for her. And so I think, but that's something that America would be so much better if we had that ability and that
yeah,
yeah, in the perfect package. Like I was watching him just before this for the UCLA medical school, and he was dating, but he always had the ability to qualify it, the
yeah.
ability to and but people would take the
They'll take the piece out.
statement before the qualifier and try to demonize him. Well, they're doing that for a purpose.
Yeah. Well, that's what's so interesting is the idea that they'll call him hateful or bigoted. We had a whole bunch of professors at ASU who signed a letter to try to get him called a bigoted white nationalist who shouldn't be allowed to speak at their college. They had he and Dennis Prager were coming out, and I spoke to Dennis Prager after that, and he said, "Yeah, that's the first time I've been called a Zionist in my life, a white nationalist." So, but they use those terms instead of both of those are people who have become well known by having conversations. And so with Charlie Kirk, he would let you be first in line. If you wanted to disagree with him, come down and be first and you can discuss it. And I think that shows actually a love for the other person because you're
Yeah, yeah,
saying
yeah.
express your ideas. Now, I might think you're wrong and we're going to discuss it, but you have a mind and you can express yourself. Whereas the students, and I think I've made the point that they loved it. Even students who thought he was wrong, they would show up by hundreds and thousands to prove him wrong. and they would make selfies of themselves doing it and put it on social media. You don't do that for someone that you think is fundamentally hateful. So they had a respect for him because I don't think their
Well,
professors,
absolutely.
by and large, are doing that anymore.
Yeah, that's why I got into a bit of an argument with what's his name, Thomas Chatterton William, where he criticized the memorial, the funeral, and but you're doing it from afar. You're not looking at I mean, come on, man. I mean, this was a tragedy. This was a murder of a 31, and this was ideological too. And why? And so then, but people didn't want to have empathy for that. The one day that Charlie Kirk had, he talked to my father. I have not listened to the podcast, but he talked to my father, Michael Brown. He was actually one of the very first to champion our documentary, What Killed Michael Brown. And so my father was able to teach him about white guilt. And so Charlie, what people have told me, my father lived in Scottsdale. So people have said, "Oh, I heard Charlie talking about your idea of white guilt on the show or something." But I would say one thing: Charlie Kirk. There's a few people out there like even yourself, Charlie Kirk, Scott Jennings on TNN. They have no white guilt, and that's why they have to be taken down. That's
Yeah.
why they have to be demonized. Dennis Prager has no white guilt. Those people have no white guilt, and so that's why. And so, other people say, "Well, how you get past white guilt?" Well, there's this whole section on the right that thinks that the way you get past white guilt, you should become white. And I'm like, "Oh, that's a big mistake. You are basically falling into the trap of the left. The
Mhm.
left wants you to be white.
Yeah,
And you
right.
think they're gonna care? They're never gonna listen to you. Never. They're never gonna say, "Oh yeah, the white man built America." But they say, "Well, why did you need a slave?" You're never gonna win an argument grounded on race. But the
Yeah.
ways you get past white guilt is to go back to the Western value, to become unapologetic about the Western value. And Charlie Kirk was unapologetic about everything. And he was unapologetic about his Christianity. And it wasn't a romantic, flowery version of Christianity. It was just essential, the basic. I'm a sinner.
Yeah.
I've accepted Jesus Christ as my savior. And he used to say that over and over. But it was something they needed to be said. It needs to be, and so that's what I admire about him. Having that faith, having that belief in America. And of course, if you've talked that much in your life, you may say something that may be a little bit off or not. But his character is far beyond above what most people have. And so
Yeah,
we
and he
really
and
did
he'd be the
lose
first
something as
person
Americans.
he'd be the first person to be okay. If you think he says something wrong, come show him. And if you show him, he'll say, "Yeah, you're right. I was wrong about that. I've seen videos where he admits he was wrong about something." So I think that's what showed us that's what attracted me to philosophy was the idea that I want to get in there and to talk about ideas and debate ideas and see, are my assumptions about the world right? And it seems like that's been taken away from a generation or two of college students, where instead it becomes you're just told, you need to believe this. Here's the categories you think in, and if you step out of line, we're going to use that white guilt against you.
Absolutely. There's nothing more powerful than the individual who can stand on their own 2 feet. I mean, there's nothing more powerful. And when you go on to an ideology, you're usually a crush because you didn't create that. You didn't make that. The people that created that are the ones exploiting you.
Yeah.
Because you're the puppet, you're the push soldier. But so somebody that can stand on their own 2 feet and argue with you and say, "Oh yeah, I'm wrong about that." That's why I have no problem. You tell me something, I go, "Oh yeah, okay, I need to think about that." Okay, like I said something recently, and one of my friends wrote me a long email, and I said, "You're right. I wrote something that was probably a little sloppy. I wrote something, 5 minutes, didn't really think about it." And I said, "Yeah, I did kind of betray my principles about the individual and kind of smear the whole group. Maybe I shouldn't have done that." But the
Yeah, that's
point
good.
is, you have that humility. We're coming into we're seeing that I think we're kind of losing that humility as a society, and I think that's something that has to be brought back. Which is, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to grow. You are an individual. You're gonna make mistakes. You're not God.
Yeah. Well,
You
that's
know,
exactly what the professors would try to make kids scared of Charlie Kirk, because they would say he's going to attack our students. And when I hear the word attack, I think that means he's like tackling them to the ground and pummeling them or something. But all they meant was he's going to argue against their philosophy. And then it counts as attacking them instead of saying, no, that's exactly what we do in the university. You change your mind multiple times in your college career, and that's a good thing.
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I remember when I was a kid. I was about maybe 14 or 15, and my father, no, or maybe 15, and my father was forced out of the university, and Hoover started to recruit him, and Thomas Storrell was one of the guys that were like pushy for him. We lived like about maybe 20 minutes away from Palo Alto, and I remember going to Tom's house for dinner and just hearing my father and Tom just talking, and the conversation was so free. It was just like boom, boom. My father would bring more of a psychological perspective to the issue, and Tom would have like, I mean, he was just a wealth of vast, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of just understanding, and a great, great insight. Because growing up before that, I had seen my father argue against his fellow professor or some of the black militias that would come by the house, and the conversations would always hit that wall. You couldn't go past that. We agreed not to go past that limit. And it wasn't free because the other person was bound by ideology.
Yeah.
And my father, if it was a challenge, the ideology would destroy that friendship. Well, he didn't trust that person enough that person would be okay with it. But when I saw, Tom and my father like talking, that conversation just goes up and up and up. And, and they would go, oh, you think about that? Oh, okay. No, no, no. I disagree with that. So they would often have conversations that would last like 2 hours over the phone and stuff like that because they were on each other's level.
Yeah.
They were on each other. Tom had lived a life. My father had lived his own life. Tom's about 15 years older than my father, but they had lived their own lives. So they were men talking.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a key point, and the idea of being free because you have a liberal education, which is the idea you're liberated from ignorance and the shackles of ideologies in order to have those kinds of conversations. And those conversations are so life-giving. When you have them or you witness them, you just want to do it again and again because there's something
absolutely.
so powerful about it. It's not because your father and Tom came to some conclusion. It was the whole thing itself.
It was just, it makes you better as a person and it
Yeah.
pushes your thought.
Yeah, exactly.
And
Yeah.
if you run into a dead end or you don't quite, but then what happens is it stays in the back of your head.
Yeah.
And then you think about it and I can't tell you how many times my father would be like, oh, and it's just like he'd be in the supermarket and write down his notes because a thought had come to him and some inspiration. And
But it's
so
what
I
makes
think
you
that's
human.
where Fisher Hampton was also part of that group as well. So you had, and they were all the same.
Yeah.
There was no white guilt in there. There was no limit, nothing.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of, I guess, I've been blessed
Yeah.
to have that standard. And it's kind of hard to find people. I do have
Yeah.
a couple of liberal friends, and I value the friendship because we
Yeah.
can go at it, and we can go at it and talk to each other, and it's
Yeah.
fun.
But
But
that's what
that's what
that's
you
really
want.
you feel your humanity and the other person's humanity because we're using our intellects and you feel, from a Christian perspective, I'd say we're made in the image of God and we have that ability to connect like that. And
Exactly.
it's really sad. Ideologies basically take that away from you and from the students because they just tell you, follow this, don't think about it.
Absolutely, because ideology is it did. It's in the back. It's in the past. It's
Yeah.
in
And
the grave.
we know religion could be used that way too. We know Christians have been, Christianity's been used to do that as well. So I'm not excusing that behavior on anybody's part. It should
But
be something that
Christianity has that power to fill somebody's soul.
right, yeah.
Religion, yeah, it has that. Whereas ideology does not.
Yeah, they don't.
It can
Yeah,
fill
they'll
with
never
power.
yeah.
But power is not necessarily the same thing as soul. In the black community, I grew up with it. I ask people like last, did you ever hear that phrase, "stole power" anymore? No. When I was growing up, people would say stole power.
Hmm.
Now you hear black power, but there was they stole power, which I teach mean overcoming.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were born black. Yeah, we were born behind, but we got that stole. We got that power. We can overcome,
Yeah.
and we've lost that. The last 2 days, don't even know that phrase, stole power. I mean, we have stole train on the TV show. We had stole power, and we were moving up. We really were, and a lot of black have been able to escape that post-disease liberalism, but there's been a significant amount they have
Yeah.
not been able to.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right that Christianity has within itself the actual story of Christianity solves that problem, even though it might get co-opted here or there by somebody that uses it as an ideology, whereas the Marxist and liberation ideologies don't have anything in them. All they have is this externalizing. But I feel like you and I have had one of these great conversations together today because time just flew by and I loved
Yeah, yeah.
all the stories.
A while, hour and a half.
Yep. I loved all the things you shared and all the stories. Your Michael Brown movie was initially censored by Amazon, right? They restored it though. Is that right?
Yes, and we were able to, yeah, use my father's, I guess, fame, or the fact that he had written for the Wall Street Journal to push back on Amazon. But
Good.
yeah,
Okay.
they did. This was during the summer of George Floyd,
Wow.
and
Yeah.
they were amplifying black voices. And the irony was that we had if you want to play identity politics, a black made documentary
Yeah.
with blacks in it, but we were the wrong one. We were the wrong black people.
That's what's amazing to me is it's so blatantly a narrative based thing. If you step out of that narrative, you're none of your identity matters anymore at all. But do you think that
Absolutely.
with your current movie, does that have already have possibilities of being censored or?
Well, I think they'll leave us alone. I hope. I mean, if they do, I mean, I think this film will probably be controversial, maybe more controversial, because we really do focus on. We don't go into right grievances. I don't want to do that, but we do definitely go into how the last this year was basically built on targeting white people, demonizing white people. And I do understand on the level the anger over, well, you didn't, to the Jews, they said, well, you didn't stay in the, when they were coming after us. Or to the Asians, you didn't stay in the, when they were coming after us. And because, I mean, first the blacks were targeted, with the post-disease, with the, the Great Society program. Then they needed an enemy, and white people were the enemy. And so we really go into that. And then, and then we create tribalism, and Asian follow. Then it's used. So for us, it's all linked together. So that's why I think Mr. Yeah. That's why it's all linked together, Mrs. Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a number on the call. So why is and so that's why but it's a way the reason why we go through all of that, through all the tribalism, is you make it very clear that our only possibility is America.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That's the thing. No, there's no other place. There's no backup after America.
No, we would have to reinvent the idea of America again. And so I think, that's why my father has done one thing over really is just everybody have courage. Get over this white guilt. I know you're worried about your job. I know you're worried about things. I mean, we pay the price in our families. The real estate is likely, and I've lost a lot of opportunity. Myself, my father has obviously lost a lot for his own belief. But if we don't do this, well, you're going to lose a lot more than your family.
And you and I have used words like Marxism and liberation theology, and I always like to let the audience know that those aren't used by you and I as insults because we're speaking about people who would identify as Marxists or as holding liberation theology. So it's not equal to calling someone a fascist who would say, "No, I'm not a fascist. That's just an insult." But I think that explains part of their hatred for America because the Marxist philosophy is just really the opposite of the American Revolution. The French and then Marxist revolutions held very opposite views from what the American wanted for their government, the limited government that respects the rights of the individual, allows for freedom of religion, and both the French and the Marxist revolutions went in the more totalitarian direction. And therefore, when you hear one of these philosophies speaking, which is derived from Marx, because whenever I speak to a professor and I know they hold to these views, but they'll tell me I'm not a Marxist. And they'll fill in the blank. Well, it's traceable down though. Like Marx is here, and that view you just described is one of the subviews because you have this kind of inclination towards the totalitarian assertion of power. And I think probably that traceable to Nietzsche through Michael Foucault, but it's this idea that external power is what matters, whereas Christianity and the United States make this emphasis that you and your father do as well on our inner character, the condition of our soul, which is much more important. So I really want to thank you for your contributions. I'm going to put
Absolutely.
yep.
Yeah.
I'm going to put your content.
I should do one last thing on this. Very short summary, but Marxism, all of that, they focused on grievance. They focused on your identity, your skin. But if you just think about it on a very fundamental level, if I was telling a student, I would just say once to them, if you do, when you die, your body's there. But what makes you alive is your soul.
Yeah.
Why would you betray your soul for your body? Yeah, you take care of your body. Your body is like the Jews would say, your body is your temple. You take care of your body. But your soul, you have to feed it. You have to nourish it. That's who you are. That's why when somebody sees your body, they know you're missing. They know your soul is gone. And so that's what God gives you. That's the mystery of this universe. You can think about whether it's coming from God or it comes from the Big Bang or whatever it is, but you have to understand one thing, that you do have a soul, and it's my belief that God gives you that soul. And our responsibility as American, not the most perfect nation, but the perfect idea, the universal idea, take care of that soul. And when you get to the end of your life, you'll be thankful that you did.
Yeah. That's a great,
You won't be angry. You'll
yeah,
be content. You'll be happy. And even if you fail, it's your failure. That's important. It's your failure. I have failed so many times, but my failure leads me to where I am.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just my way of life, and that's just what I would tell people. And that's what I would never betray that. I would never put my soul into somebody else's hand.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's a great summary and conclusion and great presentation of your philosophy. I really thank you for the time today. And like I said, it was one of these wonderful intellectual conversations that just had its own life. It goes its own direction, and time flies by. So I'm going to be looking forward to your movie coming out, and maybe we can talk again once it's out and we can see how it's been received.
Absolutely. Maybe you could come to ASU and show it on campus.
I love it. Yeah, you and I are going to be in touch. I'm going to try to make that happen because we have some spaces where that's exactly what they do. They show movies. Let's see if they'll show this movie.
We'll be there. Thank you so much for the conversation. It was a true pleasure. Thank you.